Well, hello everybody and welcome to Net Zero Live. My name is Elizabeth Hopkirk. I'm Assistant Editor at Building Design, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jerry Tate, founder of Tate Harmer Architects.
Hi.
Jerry, you founded Tate Harmer in, I think, 2007 after joining from Grimshaw.
Yeah,
and
no,
before that, Bartlett
sorry.
and Harvard. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, that's it, basically. Yeah, so Bartlett, Harvard, then Grimshaw. So, yeah, but it was great. I enjoyed all of that. And then madly went and set up my own firm just before a big global recession. So that was super timing. But anyway, still here, so it's fine.
That's going to be a whole other. We'll ask you all about that because you'll have plenty to teach us for the current. I love that you describe yourselves as optimists, and you've won plenty of awards for your architecture. Right from the start, you've been designing sustainable houses, educational buildings, cultural buildings, but the common thread running through them all is you say that they're all connected to nature. So before we kick off, I just wondered, what sustainability has clearly always been a priority for you, but when did zero carbon specifically become an aspiration? And could you put a figure on how big a proportion of your work it is currently?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, yes, sustainability has always been something we've done as a practice, and I'm almost afraid to say that. Actually, I think a lot of people don't kind of overtly say this is what we do, but that is what we do. I think then in terms of sort of zero carbon has been around for a concept for a really long time in our work, I have to say, and broadly it's mainly been operational, though, I have to say, until very recently. So I think what's really interesting now is kind of the idea of total zero carbon, covering both operational and embodied, if that makes sense. So I think certainly as a practice, we're much further ahead of the game, basically, in terms of zero carbon operational energy. That's the energy that a building uses, to heat itself, to do lighting and all these kind of things. And I think that's something that now I think actually the industry as well is quite well far forwards in terms of defining. The embodied energy is something that I'd say, schemes that we've got on our books right now where they're going for operational zero and embodied zero, I reckon that is about 10 or 20% of our total work, because I think embodied is something that unless a client is really conversant in, if you like, in what that means and really wants it, there's very little other pressures to kind of make that happen. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in my talk as well.
Great. Well, yes, that raises lots more questions, but why don't you let's hear your presentation and see what questions flow from that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, just to warn everybody, this is sort of 10-minute presentation, okay, and then we'll me and Elizabeth will have a chat again, but a sort of me slightly setting out my stall, I guess, or our stall at Tate Harmer. So I have now shared screen, so hopefully you can all see that. So, well, yeah, I'm Jerry, right, from Tate Harmer, and we specialise in sustainable buildings. Normally in, as Elizabeth said, normally in sensitive landscape and heritage settings, and our client base includes some really wonderful sort of sustainable organisations such as the Eden Project, the National Trust and Scout Association. And what that means is that we've been working to the highest sustainability standards for a really long time, and also net zero carbon. So it's something we've got a lot of experience of. And the big thing I believe, and what this talk is about really, is that you need to think about it at the very start of the process, basically. So I'm just going to touch on sort of 4 things today that I think are really important to have in mind from the very start of a project to help create a kind of overall net zero project. And the first thing I'd like to talk about, and I'm sure most of the people on this webinar should know this, that there's 2 types of carbon to consider. There's operational carbon and embodied carbon. Operational being what you use to sort of run the building during its life. And the thing that we found, we've been doing sustainable buildings now since 2007, so a long time. And to make a really low operational carbon base, you need to create an efficient building, because the more efficient your building is, the more energy efficient the kind of fabric of the building is, the less energy you have to offset through renewable technologies. And again, most people on this webinar probably know, the way energy is measured in the UK in statutory terms for operational energy is the SAP calculation. I have to say, we actually use as a design tool in the office the Passive House planning package ahead of SAP. We actually find it more useful, and that's both the Excel spreadsheet version, but also there's a plugin for SketchUp, and essentially it's a much more accurate predictor of a building's performance, and we use it on pretty much all of our projects, but we have also done certified passive houses, quite a few of them now. This is one of the last ones we did, which is Kintyre in Hertfordshire. And one of the things that Passive House makes you realize as you're using it as a design tool is there's three things that are really important. Thing number one is that you allow the right thickness of wall to create a super insulated building. So broadly, the Passive House is making you doing very efficient fabric. The second thing is that you need to orientate your building correctly. So you can see here Kintyre is orientated quite carefully in terms of its ridgeline compared to where the sun is, and that has a kind of big impact on its energy performance. But the third thing is that the form of the building has to be correct. And actually, this is a study that Tate, who are Passive House certified, who we work with on a lot of projects, and we worked with them on Kintyre, for example. Will South at Tate did this for us in 2012, which was a kind of stock check of all the houses we had on our books at that point, just looking at which ones of them had the correct form. So the form factor, that is the ratio of the area to external envelope, that means that we could get Passive House. And you can see that surprisingly few of them were actually the correct form to hit that. So, what we found is then, in terms of operational carbon energy efficiency, unless you get the form, orientation and specification of the walls, allowance for them, right from the very start, it's really difficult to make a sort of fundamentally energy efficient building. So that then, building it in from the start. But then thing number two, of course, is embodied energy. And I think this is kind of really interesting. And I think this is something now that's gaining a lot more ground, certainly in our work. And one of the reasons for that is that as you start creating a more efficient building, the percentage of the whole life carbon emissions for embodied energy start becoming a lot larger. So you can see here this is sort of a comparison of percentages of embodied energy. Actually, it's the building's total energy, but energy and carbon are kind of interchangeable. Building's total energy use, and you can see for the blue here, which is basically a passive house, the embodied energy is twice the proportion of overall energy use than a sort of standard house. I mean, the embodied energy is actually sort of the same, but the proportion of it is much larger, so it becomes a bigger issue. Now, the truth is, in embodied energy, is it's something you can build in from the start in terms of making sure you use a lot of natural materials. We generally always use timber frames. We try and minimize concrete we do use. We use things like ground blast, furnace slag replacement, and recycled aggregate. And so there's lots of things you can do, and using the green guide for specification is really useful. But the truth is, there's a bit of a conflict actually that we're finding at the moment as practice between high energy performance and using local supply chains, which when you start to do a proper embodied energy calculation, so people like Webb Yates or Heintelitz Steel will help you do those, or Arup, the travel miles start taking into account. So you can see here, this is Kintyre, and this is where the sort of components came from. And you find things like, really good Passive House certified windows tend to come from sort of Germany or Poland or Estonia. There aren't really a lot in the UK. And then once you start doing bigger projects, so now our work as a practice is getting bigger. So for example, this is a new creative centre, theatre and recital hall that we're doing for York St John University that's on site. This is all broadly timber framed. It's a Passive House standard, but not actually certified building. But the components here come from even further afield. Because it's a bigger, more complex beast. So to make it energy efficient, you start kind of sourcing things from wherever you can. And I think that the truth here is that there needs to be some kind of statutory pressure on embodied energy. and it's simply not there yet. But without that, we're finding as a company it's hard to demonstrate value for embodied carbon. So, you know, we can talk about embodied carbon with someone like the Eden project because that is something that they want to have measured and to explain to people. But for more commercial clients, it's difficult. And actually, you know, the truth is, if there was a statutory test for embodied carbon, it would reward some of our more commercial clients for things that decisions that they've made. So, for example, this is Belsize Park Fire Station. It's a Grade 2 listed fire station that we just converted into lovely new homes. And you know, we did a proper green refurb on it. I mean, it's got 0.15 U-value walls and things. The client really should have been rewarded, I think, in financial terms for making, you know, I mean, he had to because it's a heritage building, but for really, you know, retaining and making the most of a heritage building and making it into a more energy efficient building. But there's nothing in the statutory process at the moment that understands that you've retained a building and therefore not used up that embodied energy to kind of replace it, if you like. And that brings me on to the third point, of course, which is money. And this is something that, you know, you always have this conversation when it comes to sort of creating net zero carbon buildings. How do you strategize around the money? Because inevitably a sustainable building will cost more compared to the lowest common denominator building. I mean, you know, you're basically making a better product. And, you know, I have to say, we're not naive, right, as architects. Like we build a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff we build is in design and build contracts. So this, for example, this is the Townsend building for Cranley Preparatory School, but this was delivered under a design and build contract with Blue Forest. I think there are two things that are really important to sort of establish at the outset of a project to try to strategize the money. Thing number one is to get a sympathetic QS or cost consultant on board who can help you present any uplift in capital costs against whole life carbon reductions and carbon or energy reductions if they're keeping hold of the building, or isolate the costs so you can have a realistic discussion about getting better market value for a better product. And then thing number two, I think is really important, is you have to allow something in your fee to consider low carbon design. It has to be an itemized thing in your fee and it has to have time put against it. And I know there's pressure on fees, but I just think without that, you haven't got a hope of spending the right amount of time thinking about it. I think actually, as things like the new London plan come onto stream, there might start being performance fees relating to carbon reductions in the same way as the performance fees now relate to planning. So I think that's something that's probably coming. And then the fourth thing, I just thought I feel like I have to mention this really is I really think it's important to not get blinkered, you know, in the pursuit of zero carbon in two aspects really. You know, thing number one is it should be a really broad, sustainable solution. I think that's kind of really important, and it's not just focusing too much on one issue. So, for example, this is our Eshott Positive Living project that we're doing with Yorkshire Water. It's a large mixed-use project. So we're doing the Keyland Developments who are part of Yorkshire Water. Now here we're using the 6 catals model, and that ensures we take into account aspects beyond just carbon. So, for example, it's led us to create a new country park for the development, which is also accessible by the surrounding communities. So it's something that places a value beyond, you know, just one single aspect. But the thing I'd like to finish on, and the thing that I think is really important, is it really needs to be a building that people will love. Otherwise, there's no point doing it at all. So I just want to show this. This is one of my favourite photos of our work. This is the Invisible Worlds project we completed for the Eden project in 2018, which is a refurbishment of their education facilities building called the Core. And we helped them create also a new exhibition at the centre of the building. And this is the centre of it here. This is Infinity Blue by Studio Swine that we helped them do. And it's a big sculpture that spits out smoke rings, which are actually dry ice, and they smell of Earth's prehistoric past. But I just love this photo because of the children playing. So, you know, a lot of people are talking about zero carbon at the moment, and I think zero carbon is the problem to solve. And I'm absolutely certain that as an industry, we can all rise to this challenge. This is the thing we have to do now. But I do also think that if you want to get to zero carbon, it's something that you need to think about at the very start of a project. And if you do that, it can make your journey substantially easier. And that's it. That's my talk on zero carbon. So I'm going to unshare now. Oh, there. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jerry. That was fascinating, really helpful, practical, and some beautiful projects in there as well.
Thanks.
There's lots of things I'd love to ask you about. One of them is you talked about the need for statutory pressure for embodied carbon to be taken seriously. How you mentioned the London plan. Kind of, is there any hope? What can we do? Should we all be lobbying our MPs or pushing Uber to do that on our behalf?
I think, I mean, there's two things on that. I think thing number one is, you know, I know people are working at the moment on kind of standard calculation tools, right? And coming up with the right version of that is difficult. I mean, I don't like SAP, for example, and that's the standard calculation tool for operational carbon. So, you know, but there is a RICS methodology for calculating it, but there's, you know, I'd be interested to see what comes out of that. But I think there needs to be some kind of gateway measurement for embodied carbon or embodied energy in buildings, and I think that is either that is a planning requirement and that is a planning condition, or that is a building regs issue. I'd sort of prefer it to be in a funny kind of way. I think if it was a planning conditions thing, it would force developers to think about it earlier, which I think would be good. So when people are thinking about knocking buildings down, for example, if they knew that there was a clearly defined embodied energy target, you know, in there, they realize that they could meet it by not knocking a building down. I think that would really kind of help. But it has to be something that's like MPPF level. You know, it has to be across the nation, because if you just say in London, you know, I mean, the London plan's quite ahead, right? So I think London's actually, you know, to be fair, ahead of the game. But the trouble is, it means that developers in London are kind of unfairly disadvantaged, if you like, in that they have to meet more stringent rules. And I just think it's something that there should be just kind of nationwide, very clear embodied energy and carbon targets. And I do realise by saying that I'm probably making myself really unpopular, but I just think it would steer things in the right direction. You
know. And there's maybe an opportunity at the moment. There's a lot of flux in Downing Street, and the planning white paper is, I think, still being finalised and rewritten as we speak. So
yeah. If you're rewriting the rules, now's the time to think about it, really, because, you know, it's something that, I mean, I just think there's some weird cost things that go on about knocking buildings down, and kind of VAT rules and tax rules and efficiencies and all that kind of thing, which, you know, there just needs to be more incentive to kind of retain and refurbish. Yeah.
And on that subject, you mentioned something previously about that made me wonder: does the zero carbon agenda work well with refurbishing buildings, or does it work better with new build? Are there any?
Yeah. So I mean, this is sort of this interesting, you know, you've kind of hit the nail on the head. It's really interesting, you know, because you can, if you're talking about operational carbon, you can have a much more certain outcome with a new building. And actually, the certified passive houses we've done, for example, they're all new build. Now, you know, there's obviously Enefit, and we've done some Enefit stuff too. Enefit is sort of the passive house version for refurbishing buildings, but it's essentially, you know, it's essentially the passive house calculation method, but with the 15% reduction. Now, I think that is the point, really, that at the moment everything is steered towards operational carbon, which steers. So the more stringent you get operational carbon, the more you push on that, the more people are pushed into doing new build development, so that they are certain that they can meet the kind of carbon reductions that they need to meet. And I think once it starts being balanced by embodied carbon or embodied energy, so I tend to swap in my head energy and carbon, because they're actually very similar things. I'm going to get some wonks who aren't going to be happy about that, because there's different carbon ratings for different energy types. But, you know, broadly, you know, if there was a balanced pressure in terms of embodied and operational, I think that would be really useful in terms of giving a more balanced outcome for buildings.
Great. A question about clients: is appetite for this kind of thing growing, or is it still quite a hard sell?
So I think it really depends on the type of client, and that's not just you know, are they a sustainable client? It's also, you know, what are they going to do at the end of it? So people we find who are really interested in this quite often are the people who are going to kind of like retain their own buildings for a long time and be responsible for their kind of maintenance and operation. So schools, we find, you know, we do quite a lot of schools work, we do quite a lot of universities work, and we do quite a lot of sort of leisure institutions and you know, museums, people like that. All of those people are going to keep hold of the buildings, and you know, they're really interested in what the long-term benefits are. Now, so housing is difficult because a lot of the housing model is still building and then selling. So that's what I was talking about in my presentation. I talked about, you know, understanding that you can charge more for better products is something that I think that's something we're still talking about with housing developers. So the housing developers we work with tend to be people who think or understand or know that they can basically sell a house for more money because they have made it a better product. So when people go around, like our buildings tend to have good daylight and ventilation spread, for example, but they've also got triple glazing, there's really low energy bills, you know, that should be worth money, but it's demonstrating that value at an early stage in the project. Unless you have the right kind of team, I think is really difficult, because if you've got an unsympathetic QS and an agent who's advising it and they're not into it, I think that value is difficult to show to a client that it's worth doing.
Any tips? Any any successful methods that you've discovered?
Yeah. No, it is like so yes, the QS thing is really important. So you know, having the right kind of sympathetic QS is really good. I think agents are actually kind of getting more intelligent about it. But the trouble is, I'm a bit spoiled. We kind of have, because we set out our stall, we have a bit of a self-selecting group of clients. So most of the people who come to us, I kind of already know are into it, if I'm being honest. I think from, you know, if you were talking to somebody who had absolutely no interest in it and you were trying to demonstrate why it's an important thing to do, you know, without statutory pressure, I have to confess, I think you might struggle. But you know, my old boss Nick Grimshaw was always good at this. He was always like, you have to show people what good looks like. You can't make them do it. Do you know what I mean? But you have a responsibility to show people what they should be doing. And if they then say that's not what I want to do, you know, you can't force them to do something. But so I think that's probably really good advice. It's like, you can still show them what they should be doing. You know, they might not do it, or they might do some of it. If they do some of it, that's a win, you know.
That's true. Yeah. Panarin and Prasad are now doing a zero carbon, I think this is right, version of every project they produce to, I guess, show clients what good is.
Yeah.
What about a practice, perhaps like you in 2007, just starting out? You've got to grab the projects you can to a certain extent. Do you have any perhaps very practical advice for people who'd like to do the right thing, for architects who'd like to do the right thing but don't quite know where to begin?
Yeah, I mean, so choose the right clients. Sorry, it's still that, really, basically, you know. I mean, so our first client did, he was the IT person for the New Economics Foundation, was really wanted to do a low carbon building. Our second client was the environmental editor of The Independent, called Jeff Lean. You know, it was kind of like, you know, and that kind of, but yeah, you know, I mean, I think the direction you start is probably the direction you end up going. But again, I think the Penman and Prasad thing, I think, is brilliant. You know, really, that you have a responsibility to show what good looks like as an architect. And I think as architects, as designers, as builders, we can all show what we think should happen. Not every decision is going to go your way in a project. You know, that's true of sustainability. It's also true of design. You know, it doesn't mean the project's lost. It just means that you're not going to win every battle.
And very practically, were there courses, or are there courses that you'd recommend? You're clearly a fan of Passive House Planning Package. Are there any other systems that you'd recommend?
Well, so courses, I'm really sorry, I'm going to bang on about. I have to recommend the Passive House Trust Getting to Net Zero. So I'll say that more slowly. Passive House Trust Getting to Net Zero. It's an online webinar course, just really good. I bang on about it. It's just that the Passive House thing is so clear and simple, and the people who run that, they just understand exactly what's going on. It's because Passive House was started by Wolfgang Feist. He's a physicist, right? So I just think, you know, it's really useful. But also there are some really good organisations out there, like the Green Register, I think, are doing some really good courses. So I really enjoy what they do as well. They used to do some stuff at Paula Thomas Edwards. They used to run some courses there, but I think they're doing them online as well. In terms of sort of measurement, it's quite interesting, isn't it, actually, that, you know, I think BREEAM is improving a lot, I have to say, you know, as a certification tool. I think that they've kind of grappled quite well with making that into a broad product. I am really getting into the 6 capitals model at the moment. I'm kind of really enjoying that. So that's something, if you Google 6 capitals, a few people will come up. We work a lot with a company called 3Adapt, but the good thing about the 6 capitals model is it puts a financial value on everything, basically. Now, it might not be a financial value directly to your client. It might be a financial value to the community, or to, you know, someone else, or to long term to the landscape or something, you know. So it's but everything has a value, and then you can say, well, that has this amount of value. You know, it's not to you, but it is to them. So if you explain it to a council and say, this scheme creates this amount of value for you know, biodiversity or something, it can be really useful. And also it's a good holistic tool, I have to say, as well.
Sounds like it ties in very nicely with the social value agenda that more and more PQQs would be looking for evidence of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, yeah, definitely does. Yeah.
Totally different question, not political, but you mentioned the difficulty of sourcing products very locally to the project, and adding to carbon miles. How is Brexit going to affect that? Do you think UK product manufacturers to step up in time to increase capacity?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Right. Okay. But you know, when we started doing low energy houses, there were sort of 2 or 3 timber frame contractors in the UK. So you know, we had about 3 people we could phone up and say, we're doing a timber frame house, you know, can you help us? And now, you know, there are loads. I mean, there's at least 2 or 3 in every county, as far as I can make out, which is brilliant. So the kind of timber frame industry in the UK has kind of ballooned as the demand for low energy houses has increased. I really hope that actually that supply chain itself expands more. You know, as the demand increases for the right kind of buildings, the local supply chain increases, and it's not just something that we're copying from, you know, the Germans. So that sounds like a sort of pro-Brexit comment. I don't mean it to be, because I sort of, you know, but you know, I do wonder if it might actually help us create a more local supply chain. And you know, I'd probably sacrifice a bit of operational carbon for a bit more local sourcing. You know, like the Eden project, always make us do a map of where everything's coming from. And if it's, you know, they really like everything to come from Devon or Cornwall, if possible, you know, and if it comes from a long way away, they get a bit uncertain about it. And I think that's a really strong methodology for any project.
And does that force you to become a bit more creative, you and the team, in the materials that you use?
Yeah, well, it forces us to push the supply base actually. So it'll force us to, if we know that we really should be using the local timber framer in Cornwall, who actually, incidentally, who are very good, Frame UK, so hats off to them. Sorry if they're listening. You know, it forces us to, if there's something we're not sure they can deal with, it forces us to kind of talk with them early to try to work out, you know, if they can deal with it, if they can't, what we can do about that and stuff. And I think that's the thing that architects probably need to get a bit more flexible about what they're hoping to achieve, and then working with a local supplier to achieve it, rather than it has to be a certain type, it has to be Curto, or, you know, has to be cross-laminated timber. I can't have anything else, you know, and then it's got to come from, I don't know, VHAG in Austria or someone like that, which is lovely. It's great stuff, and that factory is amazing and everything. But, you know, what if it was something else that came from around the corner, kind of thing? How would that look? Yeah.
Brilliant. Just to wrap us up and to end on a positive note, I'd love to ask you to to name a couple of buildings that you find really inspiring in this way, if that's not putting you on the spot.
Oh yes, no, okay, yes, brilliant. So I love the Centre for Alternative Technology all round, basically in Machynlleth. Sorry, I can't say it very well, in Wales. So if anybody has a chance to go there, you know, all of those buildings are really great. They've got a lovely hempcrete education building, but all of the buildings are kind of really interesting examples of experiments in local sourcing and in carbon emissions. So that's one very inspirational building. I really enjoy the Earthships in New Mexico. I took a bunch of students out there a few years ago, and they are basically rammed earth houses that are made, you know, from the earth they stand on. But they're standalone. They're called ships for a reason. They're basically standalone little buildings that make all their own power and heat. So an architect called Mike Reynolds has made this sort of basically now expanding development really of Earthships in New Mexico, just outside Santa Fe, and actually had a real battle with the local authority who were going to force him to put in a whole load of energy infrastructure, and he had a sort of 10-year battle with them to kind of persuade them to not make him, you know, wire every house up, because he said that would be against what he's out to do. So I think they're really inspirational. Yeah, is that enough? I should probably do more.
Yeah, I feel like we could chat forever, but I'm going to say thank you very much indeed, Jerry, for sharing your experience and your enthusiasm and your contacts to some extent as well. So thank you for that, and thanks everyone for listening. Enjoy the rest of Net Zero Live.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. Really lovely. Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Take care. Bye. Good luck, everyone.